Right, welcome back, everybody. Now, yesterday we spoke to Richard Mamabolo, who is the spokesperson for the Police and Prison Civil Rights Union, that's POPCRU, who called for an intervention and speedy compliance to the Department of Correctional Services on the overall terrible living conditions of inmates. The incident that happened last Friday, where 2 prisoners reportedly died and others were deemed to be at high risk of exposure caused by a lush rodent infestation, got a lot of people talking. Well, this morning we've asked the spokesperson for the Department of Correctional Services, Manelisi Wolela, into the studio to talk a little bit more about this ongoing subject. It's good to have you. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the program. There are many issues. It's so difficult to do this in such a short time, but we're talking about overcrowding, the lack of sanitary facilities. We're talking about the general health, TB that is rife in some of these prisons, rat infestations. Talk to me about what's going on. How are you dealing with this crisis?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge that it is not new. We have ourselves prioritized these as challenges that we're facing and against which we've made significant progress over the years. For example, if we're talking about levels of overcrowding, we've reduced inmate numbers in the past 10 years from 187,000 to 159,000. We have reduced, over the past 12 to 14 years, remand detainees in this country from 64,000 to now just over 40,000 in South Africa. We're making great progress with our partners within the criminal justice system. But the extent of challenges from what we even inherited and the challenges of crime in the country are such that the progress may not be at the level that you and me, as correctional services, we're satisfied with. Yeah. But of course, there are centers where some of the national positive trends are being backed. For example, if we're talking about Paulsmoor, unfortunately, in the remand detention facility of Paulsmoor, it's backing the national trend, which I've given you about remand detainees. Because that center is serving 18 courts in the metro. And on top of that, the challenge is that there's not enough facilities to accommodate the remand detainees there. But what is important now is that, first of all, let's correct that not 2 offenders died, 1 offender died. 2 offenders that were infected with this were treated successfully and they are back into our facility. Number 2 is that we should also understand the context that the other case came from Grassy Park. So it's more of an aerial serious problem, this thing of rodents. Yeah. And therefore, we need to understand that within context. And secondly, you mentioned issues of TB that is rife, etc. You know, I think we need to understand the context within which we are operating. For example, correctional services in terms of dealing with TB, we've got about 83% cure rate in terms of TB, while in fact the country is sitting at about 73 or 76% cure rate of TB. So that kind of progress, but the problem is that when people look at correctional services, they would look at a particular case, of course, which is bad, and then they would blow it and reflect it as reflective of the institution holistically. And sometimes they would not even consider the context where we are. They would want to have, we are not in Europe, we are not in Denmark. We are in South Africa, and therefore the context has got to be understood by people when we're discussing these issues. Of course, we say the pace of change and the pace of addressing these issues is not at the rate that we're happy with.
Okay, so there you go. That's the response to all of this. And the reality is that there is a problem. There is a huge problem, because when you look at something like Paulsmoor Prison, and you yourself just said it now, I mean, there's also awaiting trial prisoners sitting in Paulsmoor Prison. In fact, it's 300% overcapacity. And this is a huge problem. It's a huge issue. So it's other departments that perhaps are failing us. Justice Department, you're talking about high crime levels in South Africa, which again is a big problem, which all falls on your shoulders, correctional services. What is the relationship between the other departments to assist you in a situation that, with all due respect, is in a dire condition right now?
Thank you for mentioning that. Remember, I said we've made significant progress in reducing remand detainees from 64,000 to 41,000. That is achieved because of collaboration with other partners within the criminal justice system. But there's still a lot of work to be done. For example, in Paulsmoor right now, we're collaborating with them in terms of managing that situation. One is that we have a very strict program of ensuring that we deal with the infestation of rats or the rats that are there. We're evacuating about 4,085 remand detainees to other facilities, working with the criminal justice system, of course. It's a very complex operation, but we're implementing that. What is important is that we've identified the problem and we're dealing with it as of now. And within the next few days, would have moved all those 4,085 remand detainees to other facilities and then apply appropriate levels of poison in dealing with the rats in that area.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about funding, because I think that could be quite an issue for you as well. Let's listen to this clip from yesterday's interview that we had with POPCRU. This is what they had to say, and then perhaps maybe we can get a response from you.
We always engage with the department. I think the one thing that always comes up is lack of funding. But of course, I mean, there are many other ways in which we can obviously look into resolving some of these challenges.
So lack of funding. Is this one of your biggest concerns and complaints?
Well, as the Department of Correctional Services, we can't be complaining about funding. It depends on what we're talking about. For example, in respect to issues of staff, the department currently is having to deal with the situation of so many people going out, retiring, and you name them, and the rate at which we are recruiting people into our facilities. We are stepping up. For example, yesterday, during the Corrections Week function, we were launching Operation Hira for purposes of stepping up the recruitment, particularly of scarce skills. When it comes to facilities, infrastructure, we do get funding. It may not be up to the required level so that we can be able to build all the additional facilities. The other debate, of course, which is arising up in the country is that should we take 15 or 20 billion rands and build more prisons? Remember, we have a situation in this country where you've got to have continuous balancing of interest and priorities, providing education, providing healthcare services, and providing prisons. Remember, there's a view that you build more prisons, the adverse effect in terms of education and other social development issues in society. The critical issue is we need to go back to the basics to say society, families, and everybody must take responsibility to deal with crime and prevent crime in this country. Of course, we're doing our best with the 20 billion rands that were given from the fiscus, but that will never be enough because there's no one who's got enough in this country in terms of the budget. But what is critical is we need to go back to basics as society and deal with these issues. Because Correctional Service does not manufacture a single criminal. But all of these are the results of what is taking place in our society.
All right, we have to leave it there, unfortunately, but talking to us about the conditions in our prisons here in South Africa was spokesperson of the Department of Correctional Services, Manelisi Wolela. Thank you again for your time and for your responses.